Hello, friends, and the community of Solidarity in Action, and the followers of Developing Together, our Solidarity in Action blog. Thank you very much for taking your time today to listen to me. My name is Larry Shuttleworth, and I'm the Executive Director of Solidarity in Action. And today I'd like to share a few words in memory of the men who lost their lives last week in the tragic accident in Hampstead, Ontario. Last week, 11 men lost their lives. 1 Canadian, 1 Nicaraguan, and 9 Peruvians. The accident led to a huge media frenzy, as it was one of the largest transportation accidents in the past 10 years in Canada. It's also led to a number of questions about the treatment of migrant workers here in Canada. But beneath the media frenzy and the question of treatment of migrant workers, there are 11 families who are mourning the loss of their loved ones. And at this time, on Valentine's Day, Al Dia de Amistad, we think about these families who are grieving this great loss. The community of Hampstead, Ontario is still jarred by this horrific accident. Community in Kitchener, where a number of the men lived in the same apartment, are trying to come to grips with the loss of their loved ones. And the families back at home in Peru and Nicaragua are trying to understand how a country that offered such promise could end so tragically. 9 of these men came from Lima, Peru, and the district of Comas. Comas shares a number of similarities as a community of Chorrillos, where most of our work is located. Comas is located 15 kilometers north of Central Lima. Chorrillos a further 15 kilometers south. There's only 30 kilometers that separate these two districts, and in many ways they're very similar. Comas has 500,000 people, Chorrillos has 300,000. They both grew up very quickly as a result of the urban development that took place when people from the rural areas moved to Lima. In the past few years, they both experienced economic development and an increase in the middle class. However, there are still a number of shanty towns that surround both districts. And it's here where the suffering is so great. And it's here where these migrant families lived, and where the migrant workers grew up, and where their families are today, mourning their loss. It's very difficult to deal with a loss that seems avoidable, and that is so hard to understand. Many of these migrant workers came to Canada looking for a better future, so they could better support their families. They sacrificed a great deal, and they had challenging lives here in Canada. They were unable to see their loved ones, and they couldn't see their children grow up. Their families too had great sacrifices, as they had had to see their loved ones go to Canada and not know when they would see them again, to a country that they may never visit, and a culture that they may not quite understand. And at this time, they must be struggling to try to come to terms with how this country, which they don't even know, could lead to such tragedy in their lives. When we travel to Peru this April and we begin our work, I'd like to have a chance to meet with these families, and I'd like to bring them an important message. I'd like them to know that in this time where there seems no understanding, that their sons, brothers, fathers, and friends were not just temporary workers in Canada, but they were part of their communities. This past weekend, memorial services took place throughout Ontario in celebration of the lives of these men. Shortly after the accident, there was a huge response from Canada. The Proving Consulate received thousands of messages of condolence, and the Perth County were also amazed by the response that they received. And they've done great steps by setting up a bank account to help support these families. And I'm not here to say how wonderful the Canadian culture is. That's not the point. What I'd like to do is I'd like to provide a face, a voice, an opportunity for these families who are struggling to come to grips with such a tragedy in Peru, to come to some understanding, to meet someone from Canada, a country that they've never visited. And perhaps in this way they'll be able to gain a better understanding of the lives that their husbands and fathers lived here in Canada. And perhaps in that way we can play a role in their grieving process and help them to mourn. This is just a tiny step, and it's a very small symbol. But it's something that I hope that we'll be able to do to help them as they grieve through this very tragic event. This is a very challenging time for all the families who have lost a loved one through this horrific accident. And at this time, our thoughts and our prayers are with all of them, in London, in Kitchener, in Peru, and Nicaragua. May God bless them, and for those who lost their lives, may their souls rest in peace. Christopher Fulton, David Blancas, Cesar Sanchez, Oscar Campomanes, Enrique Arenanza, Mario Abril, Corsino Jamarillo, Elvio Bravo, Juan Castillo, Fernando Correa. And for those that are still recovering, Edgar Puma, Javier Medina, and Juan Ariza. Dios le bendiga.